A 10,000 kilometer road trip to Rwanda and back was always going to hold some excitement. But day 3 was a little bit early for me. Now we were stuck in the Nlaipan, which forms part of Mkhadi. Things were looking great until... Without any experience of such a long road trip, I had set off 3 days earlier from Johannesburg, loading the car and on my way to pick up Bridget Hilton-Barber. After 6 months of planning, D-Day has arrived. Panic, mild panic. It's a very gloomy day, horrible, cold, wet winter's Joburg day. I'm filled with apprehension. But anyway, I set off to meet Bridget Hilton-Barber, and we'll see how this all pans out. I was on my way to pick up Bridget Hilton-Barber. She's a features and travel writer, and we had traveled a lot before together. She had been in Joburg to buy a car, and she came around for an alcohol-fueled lunch, where I had explained my intended solo trip. She invited herself, and I was way too drunk to decline. An uncharacteristic winter rain left a gloomy Johannesburg behind. And as I headed north, the weather cleared and warmed, and I had time to ponder why I was doing this trip. I had been to 99 countries already, and it was time to explore Africa more closely. Dramamaniac, noun, an abnormal drive or desire to travel that involves spending beyond one's means and sacrificing job, partner, or security in the lust for new experiences. People with dramamania not only feel more alive when traveling, but also start planning their next trip as soon as they arrive home. I think the term was coined for me. I arrived at Graceland Eco Lodge with its appropriately named giraffes, Elvis, Memphis, Tennessee, and Lisa Marie. Day 2 is waking up at Graceland Eco Lodge with the giraffes behind me, having their little morning snack and the gentle purring of the sound of blackout. It's a beautiful sunrise in the Grootkloof. The 1st of June dawned with a beautiful red sky, and we continued with our final packing, although clearly some were working harder than others. Somewhat apprehensively, we set off, roof-packed and bicycle attached, which later would itself become a drama of its own. 1st of June, 2023, 8:54. The spaceship Agatha Craighall Park departs 6 minutes early. Dun 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 dun. Racing northwest along the R567 until we hit the N11 towards the border crossing at Groblersbrug. This was to be the first of 14 border crossings on our tour and our first crossing of the Limpopo, which ironically would be our last river crossing 6 weeks hence, although the second time without a bridge, which made me feel very apprehensive. We left the Republic without incident. Goodbye darkness, my old friend. And we've come into Botswana, which is slightly chaotic. Not completely clear what you need to do. I've got all the forms, but it gets pushed around a bit, so I hope we don't have a problem when we try to leave Botswana. Through the desiccated landscape of Botswana with donkey cart signs and occasionally an actual donkey cart. Later that afternoon, we passed through Francistown and on to Woodlands for our first night stop. Bridget has a confectioner friend who baked the flags of the various countries, which we will eat as we eat. each country. And then we would pack up and set off on the A3.
Day 2, the 2nd of June. We are shortly departing from Woodlands, stopover and eco chalets on the Tati River and heading for Planet Baobab and Makgadikgadi Pans.
There's very little traffic on the roads as one passes attractive koppies and traditional Tswana villages. We headed west on the A3, passed through Nata, to which we would return a few days later, and then we encountered the fabulous world of the Anthill. Filling up with fuel at the Transbar, which was unsurprisingly deserted at midday, we arrived at Planet Baobab, into the cooling embrace of the bar, because even though it's winter, the temperature is still close to 30. There's a collection of Bakalanga huts with their Afro-chic decor. I'm not sure how accurate they are, but it's very pleasant to sit in the courtyard amidst the really spectacular view of baobabs. There are 6 species of baobab in Madagascar and only 2 in Africa. Although we only saw the Adansonia digitalis, they never fail to impress, especially as the light changes from the harsh daylight of noon through the softening of sunset and into the drama of night. So here we are, on day 3, rising before dawn, having taken advice, wrongly as it turned out, from the staff, on how to get to the Baines Baobab. Driving through dawn light, swerving along the potholed A3 that heads towards Maun. And finally, we hit our first sandpit tantrum. As Bridget said, FFS, why didn't we bring the compressor? Why didn't we bring more water than gin? But gliding and sliding along the road still made for an African adventure, until we got stuck a second time, and a third time. But we scrambled like spaniels, and we got back onto the road. Eventually the landscape hardens as one approaches the Ngqai Pan, part of the Makgadikgadi, which basically translates as the Great Big Nothing. It was once a massive lake, but it dried up tens of thousands of years ago, leaving behind one of the largest salt pans on Earth. Finally, on the horizon, we spotted the collection of baobabs, which comprised the Baines forest. I don't know who makes up collective nouns, but apparently it's the stillness of baobabs, which pretty much sums up our experience of them. One can see the attraction the pans have for motor vehicle companies. There is some strange, thrilling driving on the uninterrupted landscape. And there we were, scenario number 4, except now the engine was overheating as well. And because the sand was hot, it was more difficult to extricate ourselves. But finally, we made it out and back to Planet Baobab, rewarding our stupidity and foolish puckishness with loads of alcohol. I now have a compressor. The next day we awoke early and set off for what Donald Trump calls Nambia. Parts of the road passed through national parks, and occasionally we got caught up in a traffic jam. After passing through Kasane, one enters the park again with a kaleidoscope of giraffes, known as a tower, zebras, known as a dazzle, and simply a herd of roan antelope. It's discriminatory, but they don't get their own collective noun. And then onto the final curve towards the Chobe River and the border between Botswana and Namibia. After clearing the border between the two countries, the route includes views of traditional architecture which change slightly as one moves from a Tswana-dominated culture to that of the Mayeyi people of the Caprivi Strip. We ended the day at Caprivi River Lodge, on the banks of the mighty Zambezi River. It's always referred to thus. The extraordinary drumming from the Zambian bank was commemorating the death of a local chief who had died a couple of weeks earlier, and the drumming had continued 24 hours a day. Clearly someone didn't get this memo. Apparently called jetboarding, which I had never seen before. He did come a cropper a few times, but the crocs, luckily, were out for lunch. The crocodiles found on the Zambezi are the Nile crocodile, one of 4 species found in Africa. They can weigh up to a ton and live to 100 years. That's a horror story in its own. It's mostly cattle that are lost to these scary reptiles, but human loss is not unusual. Either way, I wouldn't be tempting fate. We took the safer option, a birdwatching cruise down the Zambezi River. There are around 500 species of birds to be seen here, and we were hoping to see, amongst others, the African finfoot, white-backed night heron, or even the elusive Pell's fishing owl. Then it was back on the road, heading east towards Kazangula, although the sophisticated list of the Botswana Border Office on who needed a visa is quite entertaining. Sadly, we didn't take the impressive Kazangula Bridge, which links 4 countries, because that crosses into Zambia, and we were heading for Zimbabwe, and time to pull out the carnet de douane, which costs 16,500 rand, and is essentially a passport for the vehicle. Crossing the border into Zimbabwe is pretty irksome, with hustlers hassling you the whole time for unnecessary services. But then it was on to the deserted Kazangula Road, which takes about an hour to Victoria Falls, 70 kilometers away. Lovely winter mapani trees lining the side of the road. We checked into the Safari Falls Lodge just in time to see the politicians settling in, or more appropriately, the vulture feeding session, with this lucky bushbug not to be part of the menu. The lodge sits high above the landscape, allowing great views of the area surrounding the falls. But then it was off time to see the main attraction, the falls, which I have visited 10 times before, but it never ceases to amaze. Although known before by some European geographers, and obviously for much longer by the locals, it was named for the Europeans by David Livingstone on 16th of November 1855 as Victoria Falls, and locally in Lozi as Mosi o Atunya, Thundering Smoke, or in Tonga as Shungu Namututima, or Boiling Water. It's easy to forget amidst the magnificence of the falls that this is also a reserve with a range of birds and animals like baboons and vervet monkeys. Upstream, the river flows over a level sheet of basalt with its course dotted with islands, often with hippos sunning themselves. I've visited the falls a number of times, and it does make a difference what time of the year you visit. Too much, and the falls are obscured by the rising mist. But seen in August, they may disappoint at how little water is going over, but the full magnificence of the architectonic structure is revealed. The falls are 1.7 kilometers wide and 108 meters high, and although not the highest or widest in the world, it's regarded as the largest sheet of water combining its height and width. Either way, it remains one of the most dramatic waterfalls in the world. Then the drive over the Victoria Falls Bridge and customs and immigration into Zambia. Slightly complicated, that involves various taxes and fees for the car, some of which are paid in dollars and some paid in Zambian kwacha. falls plummet over the edge into the first gorge, which is roughly divided 2/3 to Zimbabwe and 1/3 to Zambia, whereafter it winds its way through the second, third, fourth, fifth, and finally the Songwe gorges. The bridge was finished in 1905 after only 14 months of construction and was built as part of a colonial plan to connect the Cape with Cairo. It's also where I have only ever done one bungee jump, and probably my last, although an Australian woman survived a snap bungee in 2011 and she was swept into the river, but she was recovered. This was day 7 and our opportunity to chill a little after a fairly hectic week of driving every day. Also a chance to explore camping cuisine and Bridget's hope of room service. Not gonna happen. We had achieved some rhythm and I realized how silly my pre-trip apprehension had been.